Hi guys, this is Mrs. Neal, and I'm going to walk you through the annotations for To Kill a Mockingbird Chapter 6. Some important parts that we want to discuss with you guys and make sure that you pick up on. So the first part I'm going to talk about today is um, Chapter 6, of course, kind of opens up with Dill leaving at the end of the summer, and they kind of want to go on their last little adventure. Originally, Dill and Jem do. So on this last night, it kind of gives them a little bit of courage to do something they kind of, or Dill has been thinking about doing for a good while, this last little escapade. So what they talk about is Dill and Jem kind of tell Scout here that they're going to go peep in the window of Boo Radley's house to see if they could actually see him in there. So this kind of shows the little bit of mischievousness that we see in these kids still as they're trying to come of age and discover things. Of course, Scout is scared to death and she doesn't want him to go. Um, and Jem replies here, Scout, I'm telling you for the last time, shut your trap or go home. I declare to the Lord, you're getting more like a girl every day. And here, of course, she says, with that, I had no option but to join them. So again, we see kind of this gender role that Scout defies. And she definitely does not want to be this girly girl. She wants to be one of the gang. So we see that again emphasized there and a lot of her characterization in that particular part. The next part we're going to look at is kind of they go ahead and they're continuing on with this dare kind of for themselves to go and peek in the Boo Radley's house. And we see that here we kind of see the imagery and the suspense that Lee writes with. And she kind of talks about then I saw the shadow. It was the shadow of a man with a hat on. At first I thought it was a tree, but there was no wind blowing. The tree trunks never walked. The back porch was bathed in moonlight, and the shadow, crisp as toast, moved across the porch towards Jem. So this is a great piece of imagery. And we'll see a lot of that imagery in this chapter as it kind of builds the suspense. We'll see it again in just a minute. And it's really important to kind of have that in the writing because this is kind of the pinnacle part of are they really going to be able to actually get the nerve to come up and see Boo Radley in his house. So when they see the shadow, it stops, and of course they're scared to death, but then they start to kind of run away from the situation. And of course that leads us to where they struggle under the fence, and we see that Jem has to kick his pants off in order to get loose and to leave. So this causes that next dilemma that we're going to see because he has to explain why he doesn't have any pants. So they kind of go back and they find out that Mr. Nathan, as they call him, was standing inside his gate, a shotgun broken across his arm. So there we understand exactly who it was who actually fired the shot that they heard. And they talk about where Miss Stephanie kind of clarifies what happened because they come in, they pretend like they don't know what happened. And Miss Stephanie says that he shot in the air, scared and pale, and they thought that it might be some sort of black man that was kind of creeping in his collar patch, maybe to steal something. So again, that kind of gives us a characterization of Mr. Nathan. Okay, as we can see, Mr. Nathan is someone who would want to pin anything probably on the colored folks, right? So he's definitely someone who has a big racist problem, and we see that is prominent in this town, and we kind of start to associate those characters with that ideal. What kind of racial separations do we see? We know that the Finches don't see that, don't see people that way because we see how they treat Cal and how she's a part of the family. But we do start to see, and again, we see the N word being used a lot, very commonly. And that kind of shows us again what the town was like and the culture, that it was very common to be using that word. But remember that Atticus teaches his kids and teaches Scout that when she says that word, she appears common, which means uneducated. And so we can start to contrast them with the characters that we see in the neighborhood, including Mr. Nathan. So in the next part here, whenever they find out, Atticus looks down and says, or first, of course, they kind of notice that he has no pants. And Atticus asks, "Where's your pants, son?" "Pants, sir?" He's kind of thinking about what he's going to say here. "It was no use," says Scout. In his shorts before God and everybody." I sighed. So she thinks they've been caught here. Um, and of course, here we see Dill hatching one. So we know that he's coming up with some sort of a story. And if you notice how he's described at the beginning, Scout describes him as a pocket Merlin, right? Somebody magical. He kind of creates stories and he's really imaginative, and that's a big part of his characterization as well. And here he saves them because he comes out and he basically says, "Well, we were playing strip poker by the fish pool." And this explained why he didn't have any pants. But of course, we see kind of Scout's naive. She doesn't know what strip poker is. She just sees that the neighbors seem satisfied, but also they stiffened, right? They're a little bit shocked here at hearing that these kids were playing strip poker with good reason. But it's funny also, and we're going to talk a little bit about the culture again, because later on on that page, a little further down, they're asked, "Were you all playing cards?" Right? And then later on, of course, Jim says, "No, we were just playing with matches." And he talks about how the matches were dangerous. Scout says matches were dangerous, but cards were fatal. So again, we see this culture. Right? And you'll hear this also in the book, not Christian. It's not something that a Christian folk would do. And again, we see kind of that Southern culture embedded in everyday life. So they talk about those pants, and of course, Atticus calms Dill's aunt from giving him too harsh of a punishment. But now the problem is, here's the dilemma. Oh, and I know I spelled that wrong. Here's the dilemma here, because now, of course, he's easily going to get those pants from Dill, as Atticus asked him, but the thing is he doesn't have them. So now we have a little bit of a dilemma. And of course, Scout says to Jem, "Okay, well, just take the punishment. Just tell him exactly what happened. Take the punishment." She's used to that because she's used to getting in trouble every day. But here's an important, again, a characterization that we see in Jem. She says, "Look, it ain't worth it, Jim. A licking hurts, but it doesn't last. You'll get your head shot off, Jim. Please." So she's really begging with him not to go. However, here we see kind of a coming of age moment for Jim. He's growing up. Okay, he has a little bit of pride here, and that's because he says, "It's like this, Scout." Okay, sorry about that. I had the announcements kind of interrupt me there. But here's that Jem growing up, that pride that he is taking, because he says, "It's like this, Scout. Atticus ain't ever whipped me since I can remember, and I want to keep it that way." So he kind of, you see him growing up, being a little bit older, being accountable. And he also said, "We shouldn't have done that." So we see that tone of regret. So he's able to kind of analyze what they've done and kind of say, "Hey, that was something childish that we probably shouldn't have done," and now he regrets it because of kind of the commotion that it has caused. All right, the last part, whenever he insists and he's going to go and Scout's going to be loyal to him, right, and kind of keep an eye out, we see that imagery again. Where she's kind of talking about the suspense, right? If we've ever had a moment where we think we're going to get caught and we're just sweating bullets. And she talks about the sweat running down her sides and talking about him going. And she kept, every time she was listening for Mr. Radley's shotgun, and she kept hearing little things. And again, we have great imagery. The night crawlers had retired, but ripe china berries drummed on the roof when the wind stirred, and the darkness was desolate with the barking of distant dogs. So again, the imagery here really helps to kind of add to the suspense of the moment. All right, so he comes back, and he wordlessly, and this is going to be kind of what we're going to talk about in a second. He held up his pants. He lay down, and for a while I heard his cot trembling. Soon he was still, and I did not hear him stir again. So here he comes back. He holds up his pants to let her know that he got them, but again, doesn't say much. Now, at first we think, okay, he's too scared to say anything, and that's why he kind of didn't tell Scout something. But we're going to start to see this as the novel progresses. He really kind of starts to withhold information about Boo as we continue reading throughout the story, and kind of becomes a little bit introspective and questions things himself, tries to figure out things for himself. And again, we see that coming of age moment. How is he growing? How is he learning from these experiences through his childhood into becoming a man and taking Atticus's advice and really trying to see things through the eyes of other people? Because as we find out later, of course, Boo Radley is the one who has stitched up his pants, and he starts to question now, well, maybe what we've originally thought about him and what we've kind of allowed our imaginations to run wild about him isn't true, and kind of reevaluate what they're doing, as Atticus says, right, to kind of leave him alone because you don't want him to become kind of the town talk. So again, this chapter is really important to kind of look at the characterization and coming of age moments um, for Jem, Scout, and Dill.